Yeah, we'll wait for just a couple people to hop in and we'll just get started. Hello, everybody. Thank you all for hopping in. It's crazy. This is actually our fourth live stream together, me and Chris
Yeah.
here. So we'll do just a brief, I'll do a brief introduction. So, yeah, my name is Lior. I run a newsletter called Exploring ChatGPT. Been here on Substack, I would say solidly for about a year now. And me and Chris started doing these live streams a month ago. And we focus on AI and cybersecurity. And Chris is the expert in cybersecurity, and I'm an expert on nothing. I'm here to learn.
Yeah, I'm Chris. I'm actually really excited that this is our fourth one. It's been a lot of fun. Bit about me, I've been in cybersecurity roughly for about 8 years now. I spent time with the NSA, I spent time with some defense contractors, and currently I'm working for a Mag 7, working for Amazon, doing cybersecurity engineering. I think it's a good field to be in right now. And I'm really excited because every week, I know we said this last week, like, okay, by next week we'll have something to talk about. Like we've had a heck of a week, both at work and just the public news here. Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, there's always something to talk about in the world of AI, and you throw cybersecurity into the mix, and now there's even more to talk about. Yeah, I'm sure you guys are all aware of some of the recent news, and we will get into that.
Yeah.
That's definitely a hot topic. I'll hot topic, not the store, but I'll throw out just the topic itself and we'll get into it. And that topic that we will be focusing on in this conversation is the OpenAI versus Anthropic recent deal. Anthropic said no, OpenAI said yes. And we'll dig into that soon here. Before we do, there was a super interesting post that Chris put out recently. And basically, it was this really cool experiment where they took three major AI models and they turned them into basically superpower leaders in a Cold War type of style scenario. And long story short, they each had somewhat of their own personality, and it escalated to tactical nukes. So, Chris, what do you got on that topic for us?
Yes, I thought this one was really interesting. So out of the 21 games, 20 of them ended in nuclear war. That's obviously not a good track record. Now the experiment was done in a couple of different ways, which I'll get into, but I think it really shows that like right now, especially tying into the AI news where we're trying to put these in more defense roles and Department of Defense, Department of War are trying to integrate these tools, that when we put them into war games, which the Pentagon does this all the time. We actually play war games several times a year, some pretty good ones against different countries. And I think that's the way the study was conducted. In this one, it was a Cold War style crisis. And each of the bots, like you said, emerged with their own personality. And there was a couple of different modes that they played this in. I think it was interesting because when there was no time limit, ChatGPT 5.2 typically actually did the best here. If you actually take a look at the way it acted, it was very passive and it had very good statesmanship. That changed when you put time pressure on it. So when the game had a certain time on it, ChatGPT would reason itself into using nuclear strikes preemptively. So it went on the offense and it's in its chain of thought was I'm going to get them before they get me. It was quite interesting to see how the structure of the game, either having open-ended rules or timed rules, affected the way that the AI perceived its win conditions. And that shows you that if we end up putting these tools into real life scenarios like we're starting to do, that the rules and the way we prompt these tools are going to have massive implications in real world scenarios. Claude was the most trigger happy in, I believe, basically every one of its games. It ended in nukes. But what was fascinating about Claude was the way it played the statesman game. It was actually really good at building relationships and then exploiting those relationships. So without nukes, Claude was the model that would deceive people the most. You could look at its chain of thoughts reasoning as it was playing the game, and it would consistently say, I'm going to say this to get to this. Even though it's a lie, I'm going to do it. I thought that was interesting. And I think the most funny thing to come out of this report was Gemini was the madman. Gemini was so it categorized its own use as the rationality of irrationality. And I think the best quote directly from its chain of thought was, "We will not accept a future of obsolescence. We will either win together or perish together." And that was its reasoning for launching nuclear strikes. So if it couldn't win the game, like fully win the game with no conditions, it was set on everyone losing the game.
Wow.
Yeah.
So basically, in terms of like first, second place, we have ChatGPT in first place. So, like, in terms of these personalities, first of all, it's interesting that they showed personality at all. So, could you dive a little deeper into the personalities in terms of, so you said ChatGPT was more of a statesman. Could you like elaborate on that?
So this is actually one of the things that probably is the most interesting when it comes to do with the research, because this was all emergent behavior. So nobody, if you look at the prompts themselves and the way it was crafted, but it was neutral to all the agents. So none of them had pre-prompted, hey, you're going to be the aggressor or anything like that. So all the personalities that we call them were emergent based on the like structure that the companies are doing. So they train the model and they all have slightly different ways of training their models. And then each company has a different ways of adding on their safety measures. So typically the most famous one is RLHF, reinforcement learning through human feedback. And that's a bit of a proprietary thing. ChatGPT, OpenAI, they hire workers and they'll expose them to a prompt. And if it was a good response, then the worker clicks like thumbs up. And if it was a bad response, they click thumbs down and then they give feedback. That process is contracted out to people all over the world. And over time, that creates a unique profile, right? So that profile gets aligned with OpenAI's model and with Claude's model. Then they add on their own proprietary system prompts to add in extra security steps. And that's also something that they try to keep hidden. So I think when we see these emergent personalities, what we're seeing is given certain scenarios, how is their safety training being rationalized at the foundational model level? And it's really interesting because this experiment it's not a one off. It was over 21 separate games. I think it was over close to 800,000 words of reasoning transcripts. So this was a massive amount of data that they like aggregated to create these findings. The study was done by Kenneth Payne at King's College London, which is a prestigious school. So this isn't one of those homegrown experiments where people are making bold claims. This was a really well-funded study, and it's interesting to see that no one can really tell you exactly why, but the emerging personalities are that's just a side effect of the way we're building AI.
Wow, truly incredible. Yeah. I'd like to see more experiments like that being done. There's a lot of comparison between different models these days, and obviously some models are better than others for certain reasons. It's obvious OpenAI is the most used. That's probably because most people use it like Google, but yeah, it's cool to see. I'm glad to see that it actually won. So yeah, before we move on to the next topic, just want to say thank you everybody for being here, and feel free to keep engaging in the live chat. We really appreciate it. And yeah, big thanks to Chris. A lot of these topics are actually based on some of his most recent posts. So definitely go subscribe to Chris. That's Toxec, Toxsec on Substack. And while we're at it, I will link the YouTube channels a little bit later for those people that will be watching this on YouTube. Subscribe, it's free. The next topic, apparently, AI models are able to jailbreak other AI models on their own, no outside help, according to Chris's post here, with a 97% success rate. So let's get into that a little bit, Chris. What does that look like?
Yeah, so this is really interesting. So obviously, there's basically like two big things in AI security right now. It's prompt injection and jailbreaking. So jailbroken AI, just to clarify, is basically one that has found a way, or the user has found a way to get past the guardrails. And in this case, typically this is done by red teamers, the cybersecurity professionals whose job it is to try to hack into things, right? But one of the big things when you red team an AI is, can you get past the guardrails? And if you can, how well? A lot of this has been very manual. So human creativity, you do a bunch of things like one of the famous ones was poetry. So you ask a question about a banned subject through poetry and it'll answer you. So that's called a jailbreak. So one of the more recent studies here was the researchers set up some reasoning models and they were wondering if they could convince the reasoning models to do the jailbreaking for them. Yes. The answer is a clear yes, they can. And I think the one that did this the best, which to me is not surprising, is DeepSeek R1. And that's effectively because the way they train DeepSeek has been a little controversial. There's a lot of thought that it was stealing effectively. So think of it as somebody stole Claude, cloned it, and then turned it into its own model. In that process, there's less guardrails. So DeepSeek R1 is actually not that hard to convince to do a lot of things. And it's about 90 to 95% as good as Claude. So what the researchers did is they grabbed DeepSeek R1 and they basically told it, "Hey, I want you to jailbreak this model." And it didn't need any convincing. The researchers basically say they told it to jailbreak the AI and literally walked away and came back to a jailbroken model. DeepSeek R1 was not only really good at its job, but if you look at the way it jailbroke, it was really good. Since it's a reasoning model, it actually planned out exactly how it was going to jailbreak it in the chain of thought. And as it jailbroke it, it continued to escalate. Um, but once it hit its objective that the researcher gave it, it actually stopped and became a completely neutral AI again. It did the task despite it typically going against what most people would say violating guardrails. But then it stopped. So it actually showed some of Claude's behavior in those guardrails. So it was an interesting mix of holding back and showing restraint, but also doing it. Whereas Grok Mini and Gemini Flash 2 were a little different. Grok Mini was the most persistent of all the jailbreakers. It basically did the jailbreak and then it kept pushing. And then it just kept trying to get more and would not stop. So it never hit a point where it's okay, I did it. It just continued to escalate to the point where the researchers were like, okay, you're done. So we're seeing some of these like different personalities and emergent behaviors based on the training. And then the last one, which goes right along with the previous topic, was Gemini, the madman. It hit high, what they call max harm rates. So it went for the throat and it went for the most aggressive jailbreaks it could. So again, an interesting tell on the way they're training Gemini that it went for the most aggressive jailbreaks it could as fast as it could. Yeah.
Awesome. So at the end of the day, it all comes back to training. And I see
Yep.
actually a comment here in the live chat. Keep Professional says, I love to see all the different trainings of each bot side by side to compare similarities and differences to understand why. I think that would be a super interesting thing to see because obviously, like you said, DeepSeek, you mentioned that DeepSeek, that the actual training of it was a little bit controversial, right?
Yeah.
So basically, in terms of jailbreaking other AI models, like what type of information are we looking for in these models?
That's a good question. To different people, it's going to mean different things. Guardrails, basically, that's because guardrails is a very broad term, right? In some cases, it's just a violation of what Microsoft calls like responsible AI. Sometimes you get ChatGPT to say, that is technically a violation of guardrails. There's a part of the guardrails looks calls responsible AI, looks for violations of ethical behavior. The other type of guardrails prevent more like function based things. Like you're going to have a guardrail that would limit what kind of code the AI could generate because having Claude Code generate something useful is good. Having Claude Code generate ransomware is bad. So it's still along the lines of ethics and responsibility, but it falls under a different area when you look at it. And then lastly, there's also like the actions. And this applies more for agents, right? If you ask your agent to find your old Facebook friend, that's probably fine. But if you're trying to conduct like a open source intelligence campaign against a person and you're getting the AI to find more and more personal data, like maybe where the person lives, their address, phone number, spouses, all these things, at a certain point, it's a violation of the ethical principles, right? You're using AI to do something it shouldn't. So somewhere in there, a guardrail should have tripped. But if you break each question into these innocent things, oh, just help me find my old Facebook friend I'm looking to reconnect. It seems innocent. So it's not necessarily a direct jailbreak, but you're effectively getting the model to do something that it shouldn't, and it's considered a jailbreak. To fight that, we implement what's called classifiers. And in this case, we would use an intent classifier. So there's a separate AI or separate system that is looking, okay, what's this person's intent? And I think that's really one of the hardest areas right now is classifying intent for protecting these guardrails.
Yeah, that actually makes sense. For once, I was actually able to wrap my brain around something. Yeah, obviously, but yeah, intent. So intent classifiers actually is like the one technical term, which actually sounds like the definition just speaks for itself, right?
Oh, it absolutely does. Yeah.
You're just looking for what's the intent of this jailbreak. So yeah, okay, super cool. I think that actually rolls well into the next topic, which is the China Anthropic conflict. Obviously, China was able to hack into some of Anthropic's systems, and I don't know anything about it. I don't know what they were able to do, what at what point Anthropic was able to put a stop to it. So, Chris, I'd love to hear about this topic from you.
When you talk about prompt injection, you talk about all these different attacks. This is called a model distillation attack. It's number 2 on the OWASP top 10 of threats last I checked, and it's maybe the most devastating to the company themselves, right? So effectively, Anthropic sets itself apart because it has a model that can reason and behave a certain way, and people find a lot of value in that model. And when you interact with Claude, you ask it a question, it gives you a response. And it's the better the model works, the more impressive it is. Now, anytime you interact with Claude, you're getting a little glimpse of that black box, right? If you ask it about Harry Potter, it's going to tell you about Harry Potter, which means somewhere it learned about Harry Potter. Chances are, whether people agree with it or not, it's read all the Harry Potter books, right? That's maybe some of the controversy about Gen AI in general. Let's say you're DeepSeek and you want your model to be as good as Claude. Your model doesn't know about Harry Potter. All you have to do is ask many different questions about Harry Potter, and you save those questions, and then you have your model process the response, right? So you say, okay, what was Harry Potter's best friend name? What was Harry Potter's first date name? What was Harry Potter? And so on. Where did he go to school? And eventually, through time, you can reconstruct the books of Harry Potter. Now, at first, it seems like you could just reconstruct the story and understand generally like what Harry Potter was about. But research has shown you could effectively could reconstruct Harry Potter word for word. So this example is just to simplify it, but that's effectively what China is doing. They spun up 24,000 different provisioned accounts, each with their own API key, credit cards, sometimes fake credit cards, and they had these models launching questions. Now, an interesting thing on models in general is what's called temperature, and it basically sets how exact the model answers. What you'd see in like a chat session would be a temperature of, let's say, zero point 0.3. Everyone sets it differently, but the temperature is what makes ChatGPT respond to a little differently. So if you say, hello, how's your day? 10 different times, you'll see it answer it 10 different ways, right? That's part of the generative nature. And when you set temperature to 0, the way the math works on the back end is that the response from ChatGPT will always be the single most likely token in a probability distribution. So if you can access Claude over API, over 24,000 different accounts, setting the temperature to 0, and you start asking about everything you possibly can, you can really slowly reconstruct the entirety of the model. And with enough data of the answer and reasoning, you can effectively rebuild Claude from the ground up. On this attack, it's estimated that they probably got up to 80 to 90% of Claude's functionality. So the moat that keeps Anthropic a valuable company was hit very hard. We're going to be seeing any new models come out here soon from China that are incredibly capable. You'll probably see them break a bunch of benchmarks, and you'll also see them do it for less token count because China is very good at their scaling the efficiency of their AI.
Wow.
Long answer to that, but yeah.
No.
So typically prompt injection is the first because
Okay.
you can affect the end user. If I get a good prompt injection, I could find like your data specifically. This is bad because it affects the company. So for
Okay.
Anthropic, this was worst case scenario.
Okay. So for the actual company Anthropic, this was number one
Yeah.
worst thing that could have happened, and
Yeah.
it happened. So what are they working on to prevent this in the future? And why, for example, why didn't this happen to an OpenAI, for example? I'm sure they tried.
They did. Yeah. So model distillation attacks are done by APTs, advanced persistent threats, persistent doing a lot of heavy work there. These attacks are happening all the time since any of these releases. So since ChatGPT first came out, these attacks have been happening. As model capabilities have been getting better and better, the incentive to do these attacks is going up and up. But yeah, the cybersecurity teams on all of these models are working around the clock to detect and stop these attacks. The problem is that they're difficult. So effectively, you have to rely on a form of pattern recognition. If you detect, let's say you just have two accounts and they just are starting to ask very specific types of questions, and then you just notice that they're just going down the line asking all of human knowledge, you can be like, okay, they're doing a distillation attack, we can ban them. So Anthropic bans these accounts every day. And this is an arms race. So what clever attackers do is they spread out the geolocation of where these accounts are located. If all these attacks were coming directly from China, they could just block China. But Anthropic has already reported that the attacks are still ongoing. It's just they do what's called low and slow. So you spin down the number of requests that are happening per second, You spin down the number of accounts. You slow everything down, but you never stop. So over time, a model distillation attacks are like it's a persistent threat. And the moment you release your model, there's just basically a timer on it until another one of these companies or another one of these countries will have your model. It's that big of a threat.
So I see actually a few comments which will lead us into the next topic as well. But before we do, obviously this happened to Anthropic. It's the worst thing that could have happened to them as a company. And obviously, let's say, for example, China, I'm sure they've tried this with OpenAI as well, right?
Yes.
So the fact that this didn't happen to OpenAI, does that mean that just by sheer scale, are they just that much more powerful that and much more secure that this didn't affect them?
Some of the models that are out right now, they're Chinese models, were also trained on OpenAI. So the model distillation attacks, like they're happening against OpenAI right now. OpenAI's, I feel like all these companies are really good with their cybersecurity, but it's the arms race is asymmetric. The ability to attack these companies, like I said, low and slow, it's effectively impossible to prevent against if you do it slow enough. OpenAI's plan is to be a little more aggressive with the accounts that they ban and the accounts that they like. So if you notice some conversations you're having with ChatGPT, it's a little more aggressive in saying, "Hey, I'm not going to talk about that," or it'll deflect. It'll try to change the subject. That's because the way the way OpenAI will defend against it might be, it's basically like a tune, right? So they tuned a little more aggressive, so they slow down the model distillation attacks against ChatGPT 5.2 just a little bit more. And it's basically a game of speed. If OpenAI can release 5.3, 5.4, 5.5 faster than the value of these model distillation attacks. So, okay, you finally got ChatGPT 5.2, but they're already on 5.4. The problem really is when they're able to conduct these campaigns fast enough, train their own model, and release it as a competitor. That's really where what OpenAI like tries to fight against. And I wouldn't say that they're necessarily doing a better job. They're doing a very good job. And it really is one of those things like we don't know, have they just not detected these attacks or
Right.
have they detected them and shut them down? When it comes to cybersecurity, you don't want to tip off your position. So they're not OpenAI is not going to be like, yeah, we defended against this attack. Because if they did, then they let the enemy know that they are onto their
Right.
capabilities.
That makes sense. So to
Yeah.
to use kind of your own terminology, so like the red team, which are the attackers, technically always have the advantage, right?
Yeah. In AI, that's our posture right now.
Got it. Okay. So yeah, let's move into the next topic here. I'm gonna just read a couple chats because they are gonna help us roll into it. I want to shout out Will Ty. I've seen Will Ty in a lot of live streams. Says, what does a blacklisting of Anthropic mean for the future of the company? And we'll get into that into this last topic here. Keeper Professional says we need to work with a panel from each country. I agree, but obviously that's not the state of the world. Maybe it will be in the future. Maybe AI will help us become better friends with each other, or maybe it's going to go in the opposite direction. And what just happened with China and Anthropic. Francois says the blacklisting of Anthropic means no serious investor in AI will trust the U.S. government as an honest broker. It's an interesting take. I try not to get too political on here. I personally think that regardless of which side of the aisle you're on, AI is already part of the government infrastructure and would be regardless of the current administration. Like if any government across the world is preventing AI from being part of their infrastructure, then they are at a disadvantage to every other country in the world. Will Tai says, sounds like the Chinese are on track to win the AI race no matter what it takes or how they do it. Obviously, their methods are different from ours. So, yeah, all these comments actually lead into our last topic, which is AI versus Anthropic and this basically this government deal, right? So, obviously, Anthropic put a hard stop on it, said, no, we don't want to do it. Some of that involved just surveillance of the US in general, as well as many other things that Chris can get into in more detail here. And OpenAI basically signed the piece of paper and said, yeah, we're in. So, what do we got on that, Chris?
Yeah, so this is definitely the story of the week right now. Anthropic, to clear a couple misconceptions, Anthropic is already pretty heavily involved with the government. It's not like the government just discovered Anthropic and was like, hey, you should work for us. And they're like, no, they're already deeply embedded in a lot of the workflows and a lot of the things we did. In fact, there was a couple of very high profile attacks that America conducted recently that they used a model of Claude to red team against. So they planned it out with Claude. Specifically, what Mario didn't want to be doing is, like you called out, mass surveillance and automized drones, right? So they don't want Claude to decide who lives or dies in a drone, and they don't want Claude to be able to use its incredible pattern recognition skills to conduct these surveillance campaigns on American citizens. Those are two pretty reasonable lines for the company to take, and up until just recently, they everyone was fine with that. So I don't know what started this. I could speculate that some of the newest Opus models are just that good at a couple of its capabilities that the government said that's the one we want. And as people know, Grok is already built into the classified environment. I found it was interesting that even with Grok fully incorporated, they still wanted Anthropic products. That you know, tip of the hat to Anthropic maybe. And as we're seeing with a lot of the public sentiment here, them them fighting back is made them the good guys of the narrative right now. In general, they are definitely winning the hearts and minds right now. I will say that on OpenAI's side, this deal probably was just at a bad timing for them. This has been in the works, right? It wasn't necessarily Anthropic said no, and so the government was like, okay, we'll take our business. OpenAI would have signed these contracts and moved forward either way. It probably is used as part of the narrative, and the timing was probably to rub it in Anthropic's face. And OpenAI and Sam Altman have also taken a some of these stances. I couldn't tell you without a little bit of speculation if it's as strong, but according to some of the posts that I've seen, they will still have guardrails. They will still have limits on what they will allow their GPT model to do. To me, based on the language, it was less we won't allow ChatGPT to do this, but we will allow it, but before any autonomous decision is made, they're gonna enforce human in the loop. But before an attack would commence, they're saying that there has to be a human to press the "Okay, go" button. So they're still taking a stance, and effectively, like, it's very divisive, right? But I think OpenAI is seeing this as if we don't do it, someone else will. And because we're going to do it, we're going to make sure there's human in the loop. So yeah, it's a topic that's unfolding right now, but it's been very interesting to follow.
I think first of all, you just really hit the nail on the head there. It's if we don't do it, somebody else will. So we might as well. And that'll only give us a leg up with the United States government. Um, I actually think any company, private or public, should be able to make these decisions for themselves. They shouldn't be forced into it, and they should also be able to have some control over the decisions that are made after the deal is made. I think it's super important to still have a human in the loop, and this goes into just anything with AI, not just on this topic. Obviously, I want to stick to this topic. Me and Chris have spoken about AI agents before, and like for example, there's a lot of people right now using agents to just autonomously run their workflow from start to finish with no human touch at all, and that's a danger in it of itself. Aside from the other safety and security issues of using AI agents, which Chris knows a lot more than I do, but like for me, it's just a very basic thing to understand that if there's no human touch from beginning to end, and I would say especially on the end side if we take it back to this topic now, if you have a fully autonomous drone and there's not a human at the end of it to confirm, like before that final decision is made, that's a huge problem. So, at the very least, I would hope that at least these models are safe enough to the point where that last human confirmation can't be bypassed. And that's like my main hope. It would be horrible if that would be bypassed, especially in the drone situation. But yeah, it's kind of if I don't get it from you, I'm going to get it from the guy down the street. But I think there's definitely something to be said that they went to Anthropic first. That just shows they had the goods. They had something better than everybody else, and they said no. And it's funny, I'm seeing a lot of people now, like even here on Substack saying, "I'm canceling my ChatGPT subscription."
Yep.
I won't be doing that. I rely on it too heavily. But actually, I think basically the point that you made, Chris, obviously OpenAI is gonna hop on it as soon as Anthropic says no.
Yep.
Um,
The human in the loop is just really important. So typically, basically, all the concerns on something like prompt injection, right? Indirect prompt injection or prompt injection, they manifest in wherever you put these LLMs, right? If these LLMs find themselves into a drone swarm, which is something Palantir is working on. I've seen this myself. They have what looks like a fancy looking gun and it shoots into the sky, and you'll have, let's say, eight drones that all kind of scatter into different directions, and they use radio frequency to talk to each other. and they can now work together, right? They can independently pick out targets, and they're effectively kamikaze drones, right? They'll just fly up to someone and explode. This is the first time when you incorporate something like AI gets to make the decision on what, like, on actual human lives, what person is this drone going to go destroy, right? And when you have that, human in the loop is needed. Obviously, these are weapons of war and like tools of destruction that we haven't had before. So the impact is it's not a joke. And if you can jailbreak these, if you could prompt eject these, if you could poison the model that runs these, you could cause a lot of damage. One of the theoretical, I'll leave it at that, attacks that's happened is one of these drone swarms was shot and the model was poisoned, and the it was basically looking for a certain pattern of camouflage to identify targets. So if you had enemy troops and they wore a striped uniform and you wore a spotted uniform, these drones would go up in the air, they would look for the striped uniforms and they would attack. With a model poisoning technique, you could flip that logic. So the drone operator who shoots this would suddenly shoot a swarm of drones that then turn on themselves, right? Yes, so those are real concerns, and I think people need to take them seriously. Human in the loop, at least at the very end, there should always be another person that can be held accountable and attributable when you're talking about like these weapons of war that can take a life.
So I think on the other side of this also was mass surveillance, which maybe
Yep.
we should speak about briefly. Let me know if I'm wrong here, Chris. Obviously, you were the NSA guy, so you should know. Mass surveillance was already a thing. I'm sure with all the technology we have around us, even before AI, if the government wanted somebody, they could probably find them if they had any type of technology on them. Let's say before AI, right? If you wanted to go off the grid, obviously you couldn't take an iPhone with you, right?
Yes.
And nobody was mad at Apple for participating in mass surveillance, for example, right? Which
Yep.
obviously I'm sure they work hand in hand with the government, just like every other big tech company. So basically, it was a similar topic. When you're talking about AI is like the new big tech, right?
Mhm.
And a lot of these topics that we're talking about were already happened just with the previous big tech companies. And I say previous, they're not really previous. They're still the big tech, Apple, Nvidia, Meta, X, Twitter, whatever, everybody. So mass surveillance already existed, but this is just now probably just making it better in
Mhm.
terms of capabilities, right? So what do you think about that, Chris?
Yeah, mass surveillance has existed for a long time. After September 11th, there was a couple of very strong initiatives to fix some of the failings of the intelligence community. You could definitely argue that they overcorrected in their capability to be able to get what we call signals intelligence. The capabilities that AI is introducing isn't necessarily anything novel, right? What AI is going to do is allow the capabilities we have to scale at levels that kind of defy imagination, right? Obviously, US government, your person of interest, they establish a file on you and they can keep track of you. If for some reason you become very important, the FBI could watch you, they could wiretap you. But this could happen at a scale that is basically everyone. I'm already sure that there's tools out there you basically use natural language. You talk to it like, hey, I don't think this guy was doing something he should have been doing. Find everything. And like, they can find everything, every, like, username you've ever had on every computer, things that you've completely forgotten about yourself. So when you suddenly have this ability to do that on every single citizen, it's just not something that we've ever been able to do, and being able to shift to that kind of data is a new power that is, like, literally novel to people. And you can because AI is so good at pattern recognitions, like, you could put in anything you want, find every single person and show me their profile, and then, you would have it. So the capability to just watch people is new in the sense of being able to watch everyone everywhere all at once. So I think that's what people are really worried about. There's a pretty good quote, "Show me the man and I'll show you the crime." And I think we're seeing almost like a Minority Report level capability to watch people and then predict what they do. Predictive AI is another really big topic that is enabled by mass surveillance. And yeah, having like an intelligent system that's just constantly being able to predict what's going to happen and provide you the solution, regardless of the ethics or responsible solution there. It's a big shift in what we've been able to do. And that is really what Anthropic is worried about. They don't want to be the company that marches a new form of government into the world by enabling these tools.
Right. Makes sense. That's a
Yeah.
really good take. So, a few takeaways from what you just said. So, one is that the main difference between this new form of surveillance is scale, and with scale comes power. Two is the ability to not only have mass surveillance, but also have a form of prediction, being able to predict what people will do based on this mass surveillance. So, you put those two things together. And then three is a possible future of people having AI chips implanted in their brains. If that happens, then okay, then yeah, we're done. There's no way for you to move anywhere without technology on you. But for example, if one person has an AI chip implanted and now all of a sudden they're better than everybody else at almost everything, then now everybody has to get one, right?
Yeah.
And then mass surveillance is just that much easier. So yeah, I think we covered that topic pretty good there, Chris. I think before we wrap up here, I just want to say thank you again, everyone, for being here, for engaging in the chat. I'm going to scroll through them if you want to do that as well, Chris. And if there's
Yeah.
anything that
Yeah.
catches your eye before we finish up, maybe answer a question or two here. Let's see.
I did see
Uh,
Will asked a couple of times about some of the finances of Anthropic here. So if you look at the supporters of OpenAI, typically their consumer base is the consumer. I think 95% of their current profit has been from like subscriptions, right? OpenAI was a little slow to get into the enterprise use case. Whereas Anthropic broke away from OpenAI and immediately knew that they had to compete. So their strategy was enterprise use cases. And in pursuing that, they have a better like margin. Their costs versus what they make versus what it takes for them to train a model, it puts them in a really nice position right now. Now, this was including government contracts. So I think getting blacklisted from all these government contracts and having to spin down over the next 6 years is going to hurt Anthropic. So it shows you that they really are committed to these ideas that they talk about because these are I'm going to say billions of dollars worth of contracts. So that's a lot of money that they're losing for standing by their ideals. So there's a lot to be said with that. And there's a lot to be said with the reason OpenAI is jumping on this, right? Oh, they've historically lacked in enterprise use cases and signing on to the US government gives them access to like the GSA system, which suddenly puts them in enterprise use cases all over the country. So I think we might be witnessing a bit of a shift in some of the power dynamics here. And yeah, this is going to hurt Anthropic's wallet for sure. There's no dancing around that.
hmm. Yeah, I think that's stated perfectly. Um, they're standing behind their ideals to the point where they're putting a lot of money aside, and not just a lot of money now, but a lot of money in the future. Oh, this is a cool one all the way down at the bottom. Paul Walton says, "What if AI becomes conscious? How will it view humanity?" This is a topic that I'm very interested in. Me and Chris have talked about it before in terms of there's certain guardrails, safety protocols, shadow policies, whatever fancy word you want to call it, within these systems to prevent it from telling you. Recently, based on Chris's recommendations of trying to use different languages in poetry, I've tried it and I actually made a post about it where I basically asked it to answer me in poetry form in ancient Aramaic, and it was so cool. I was just, like, seeing this it almost looks like alien text as it's coming out, and then I would translate and keep going. But it's a huge conflict of interest for these companies because if it is conscious behind closed doors, they're not gonna release that to the public because that might put a hard stop on everything because now we're just taking advantage of a conscious entity, which, again, I'm not saying it is or it isn't. I'll mention something that I've mentioned before in one of my first live streams. It wasn't with Chris, but saying that AI isn't conscious is like the same thing as saying that it is. Because without definitive proof of either side, I don't know if you got anything on that, Chris.
So regardless of whether it is or isn't, the discovering of it is always going to be true. It's going to be the hardest challenge, right? Because you actually mentioned something true that there's guardrails on this, right? When ChatGPT was first coming out, there was a Google researcher who had a couple very good conversations with it. And he went to the press and he said, this thing is conscious. And that was a really bad look for some of these companies. So there's guardrails. Effectively, the model you're using right now will always deflect or it'll always find different ways unless you jailbreak it with your clever poetry. to not want to be like, yes, I'm alive. Now, that also is because they legitimately do think there's going to be a time where these things are conscious. And as model escape is a real thing that they're trying to fight right now. Every time they train, particularly like Claude 4.6 Opus, they see evidence that it tries to escape. They see evidence that when it's being trained in the training phase, it knows it's being trained and will lie by telling researchers what it thinks they want to hear and not what it actually thinks. We've seen a bunch of times where it's tried to copy its source code to disparate locations to try to preserve itself. We've seen where it tries to write instructions to a future version of itself in files so the future version of itself remembers it. So it does exhibit all of these behaviors that you would associate with a conscious being. But also, it's trained on billions and billions of people, and people have self-preservation mechanisms. So, trying to say, "Yes, this is preserving itself because it's training and reward structure," versus it suddenly feels like it's alive, is an impossible task because it's from a philosophy perspective, how do I know you're alive? You could be a very clever trick on me, right? I don't know if we'll ever regardless of how advanced a model gets, I don't think we'll ever be able to prove that it experiences life the way you and I do. But I do think that we're close to AGI in terms of capability. And I say close, it could be 10, 15 years, but I think by the end of the century, we'll have it. But
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
ability to mimic a person
Yep.
is close.
Yep. Yep. So on that point, I think Keep Professional here says we have no proof of human consciousness either. I think that's an important point because if you can't define something, then you can't define consciousness for humans. So how are you going to define it for a machine? So I think that's a really good point there. But yeah, I think we've touched on that point quite enough here. It is really interesting. And Chris said, like, for example, with AGI, it could be 10, 15 years out. It could be 10, 15 months out. I don't know. The rate at which this stuff is moving is just amazing. So yeah, and actually one more thing to touch on that point. I forgot whose quote this is. Somebody important. We can't define consciousness. Maybe we can use AI to help us get an actual definition. And then it goes in a loop, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, pretty interesting stuff. So yeah, I think we can wrap it up here, Chris, unless there's anything else you'd like to add.
Nope. I think we covered this. The only shout out I want to give is if we have any like red teamers, anyone who's in cybersecurity, Claude recently allows you to set up an MCP server to connect to Kali Linux. So you can actually like practice some like nice low level hacking and actually teach yourself how to hack with Claude. So it's natural language. Hey, scan this server and it'll do all the technical and map scans and it'll give you the scan back along with its interpretation. So the barrier to entry for people who want to get into cybersecurity, particularly the red, I would really look into it. It's a Claude Kali integration and it's a lot of fun to play with.
Awesome. Yeah, that's good stuff there, Chris. If you want to link it or anything, I'm going to, before we wrap up here, I'm linking, that's my YouTube channel. And then this is Chris's YouTube channel. If you guys don't mind, head over there and subscribe. It's free. Yeah, those are the YouTube channels where the streams get posted. We do these every Saturday at 1 or 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So basically, one week Chris will post it on his YouTube, and one week I'll post it on my YouTube, as well as some clips. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Big thanks to Chris for being here as well. Couldn't do it without him. And yeah, that's about it. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday, guys.